Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jesper Krüger, and I'm heading up a function at Maersk that basically takes care of our short-term as well as long-term planning cycles. We do performance management. We are responsible for having difficult or different scenarios at all time, making sure that we are prepared whenever external as well as internal circumstances change. Personally, I have been spending the last 20 years on these issues, doing forecasting, doing risk analysis, doing strategy assessments, and so on and so on. And I have a strong belief that what differentiates the best companies or the good companies from average companies is actually the ability to change when things change. Whether or not that's external things like GDP, like oil price, like demand-supply pictures, or whether or not it's internal stuff like organizational change, cost-cutting exercise. So that's my very strong belief, and I have a slide on that in the pack. I'll try to spend the next 20-25 minutes on describing how we have tackled the issues around forecasting, around setting targets, around allocating capital within Maersk, and I'll also slightly discuss how we do performance management at Maersk. But before I dig into these issues, let me give you a very brief introduction to Maersk, which is an older company founded more than 100 years ago, and we are headquartered in Copenhagen. A very global company employing around 90,000 people, and we last year made a profit of $4.5 billion, so a rather profitable company as well. We will have a slightly lower result this year. But basically our activities are within two legs. We have activities, this is the majority of our activities, which is within global containerized trade. So these are the containers that make sure that you have fresh bananas at all points of the year. For example, so basically a shipping company in here, and then on the other side, which is like 40% of our business, we support the global demand for energy. So that's about having an oil company, having a drilling company, and so on and so on. And I have a slide on that at a later time. We have been on a journey moving away from traditional calendar year budgets for the last 10-15 years, and I would like to show you where we have come from, where we are now, and where we're going, and basically giving you an understanding of what we have been through and why we have eventually changed from budgets to not having budgets as we have today. So basically, going back 10-15 years, growth was the absolute number one priority for our company. We had a very volatile earnings environment where earnings in general follow the shipping market, and some of you might know that rates within shipping markets are extremely volatile. And as we had Maersk Line, which is our container business, being very dominant in the group, earnings for the group were very, very volatile. In the middle of 2005 to 8, something like that, we initiated a journey where we basically made sure that the 8 business units we are in had a more autonomous management. We saw a need to make sure that the business units were separated away from the group, so that each business unit had their own management, had their own legal structure, had their own HR department, basically were able to do everything themselves without being under the influence of group or headquarters where I come from. So that basically meant that now the individual business units had to be much more focused on whatever happened in the industry. They had to be much more focused on the industry dynamics and so on and so on. And that basically meant over a 5-year period that we saw low volatility in our earnings. We slowly moved away from Maersk Line being the very dominant driver for the business, so had less volatility in our current business model, and we saw also an increasing presence in growth market as opposed to being very mature in the older years. Where we're going right now is where we are aiming to be what we define as being a premium conglomerate, and by that we mean that the business units we are in, the sum of these business units should have a higher value when they belong to a group than if they were standalone businesses. I have a slide on that as well later on. This is the journey we have been through over the last 15 years. We are definitely a conglomerate, and we still are today, but going back 15 years, we had a company of around $20 billion in revenue. We have made a lot of acquisitions, but at the same time we have made a lot of divestments. So right now, or ending 2014, we almost have 15 billion of revenue. And this is what we look like today. So still a conglomerate with the pros and cons being a conglomerate. But anyway, we are a much slimmer conglomerate than we were 15, 20 years ago. Basically centered around these 5 legs, as we call them. We have Maersk Line, the container business. We have Maersk Oil, which is an exploration company. We have the terminals, which where the ships are keying. And then we have a drilling company as well. The 5th leg is the combination of 4 of our smaller business units. I've taken this slide with me just to highlight that everything we do at group level is centered around performance management. We have a portfolio optimization structure, so we make sure that at all times we have the right portfolio, that we allocate capital, so we have the right mix between growth, market, emerging markets, mature markets, that we have the right mix between different industries, and that we are sure that we will be at the right level of or the right industries over the next 15 to 20 years. We have a very focused and disciplined capital allocation, where the benefit of, for example, a drilling company belonging to a group with a stable cash flow coming from Maersk Oil, for example, is that we can actually allocate capital to some of the business units we have that are in difficult industries right now and where they don't have access to cash. So this is one of our focus areas. We have a very disciplined capital allocation where we're able to invest counter-cyclical. And then as a final parameter, we aim, or we have this relatively strict performance management where we aim for all our business units to be top quartile within their own industries. I have a slide as well on that later. This one I want to show you. This is how our management process looked until 2010. We had a very long and very detailed budgeting process. We normally started the budgeting process after summer, where we spent a lot of time making assumptions about how the next calendar year will look like. We had a seriously detailed budgeting process for all our more than 1,000 legal entities. And some of the points here mentioning that the business review meetings we had were very centered on actual. So what happened in the last quarter, what happened in last year, and how did we explain deviations to forecast, and so on and so on. And what we actually found out that, and I'm sure that this is why you're all here, is that these separate processes around target setting, around forecasting, and around resource allocation, they don't mix. It's impossible to have one good process that entails all of these 3 sub-processes. But because when you look at forecasting, a forecast needs to be realistic, it needs to be what you think will happen. Ambitious target setting, this is what you want to happen. And finally, resource allocation is, so what kind of resources or extra capital does it take for you to go where you want to be? So these 3 processes, being realistic, ambitious at the same time, is what we at least found out impossible to mix. So what we did was we initiated a process. And when we started the process, we thought long and hard about, so what is it that our new process should look like? And we decided to put out these 4 points here. First of all, we wanted to increase our visibility in all our business model, both at business unit level, but also at group level. So much more forward-looking stuff into our current business model. Second of all, and maybe most important, we wanted to have agility within our business model. We wanted to make sure that whenever things are happening out there, whether or not it's external factors, as I mentioned previously, or internal factors, we're able to, at a relative early stage, identify and make corrections to the issues. Then we needed to have some sort of control over what was in there. So a balanced scorecard model. And then finally, and also very, very important, and the last speaker from London Business School also alluded to that, we wanted to have a very, very simple model. I have brought details of the models later, but I actually think this is one of the most important points that we have today. We have a very simple forecasting model, both when it comes to our 5 quarters of forecast, rolling forecast, as well as our yearly 5 years of rolling yearly forecast. But these were the design criteria, and I have brought this survey, as you can see here. I'm not sure how much you can see actually, but anyway, this is a survey made by UBS in 2014, and basically what it shows, it shows the return on capital employed, so that the invested capital that the business that the companies have. And it says, so what are the best in class, average, the middle 50%, and the laggards, the bottom 50%. And let me just try to explain it going left to right. So what we see here is companies' ability to communicate forecasts within an organization. You can see here that the difference between the ones that are best in class over time, over this 4-year period, as well as the laggards, it's not really a huge difference. The same goes to a certain degree to the ability to meet forecasts. The difference between being best and being middle is not really important. But the next 3 layers, so the ability to reforecast when things are changing. Now we start to see a difference between being best in class and average. And it increases when we move to the right. So the ability, the final one, the ability to incorporate corrections when assumptions change. This is something that not all companies can do. And coming back to my initial comment, I strongly believe that if you have that capability within your company, then your likelihood of success increases dramatically. This is definitely also the difficult part. With that slide, I was also surprisingly asked to ask you a few questions. I'll give you an exercise, but let's spend 2, 3, 4 minutes at each table looking at this list and see if you can place your own company within this and see if you agree to the conclusions that's in here. Okay. Let's try to hear some initial comments, some initial conclusions. Anyone want the cube?
We were just reflecting, and actually maybe it's posing a question back, and how do you separate the targets? So are you going to come on to that, of course?
That's some of the next slides.
Well, because we were talking about that how often the same process will have target setting and forecasting, and then obviously cognizant of what you just said is that, woo. So I'm very excited about the second half.
Yeah, don't be, unfortunately. Anyone else?
I was wondering, do you evaluate the precision of your forecasts?
Yes, absolutely.
And do they match? Or do they?
No, not always.
Okay.
And actually, I don't think that it's that important. The important part in my mind is that we have a detailed thought process around our forecast, and that we know all the underlying assumptions behind it. So whenever we can see that assumptions out there change, we know what to do. So I wouldn't claim at all that we are better at forecasting than the average company out there.
So it's more like a process of planning for different scenarios.
Yes.
Yeah.
And making sure that the forecasts are well discussed and well understood in the entire organization. So this is what we actually have today. It took us 2, 3, 4 years to come here, and we have not reached what could be considered as the final solution yet at all. But what we have is we have 3 separate processes now where we continuously work on each sub-process and try to make it the best process that is available for us. And let's start to the left here with our quarterly rolling forecast. We do 5 quarters of rolling forecast on a quarterly basis, update them, of course, discuss them, discuss assumptions, and so on and so on. And we do it at the 8 business units we have, and then at group level we of course consolidate them. We only have about 35 input accounts today, and that's not a lot actually. And that's both on P&L, balance sheet, and cash flow, and then we have some individual KPIs for all our business units. In our meetings, in our review meetings, we spend a lot of time on reviewing, of course. So what happened in the last quarter, that's around 25% of the meeting time we have on a quarterly basis with the business units. But on the majority, the 75%, we definitely spend on looking forward. So what are your assumptions for the coming 5 quarters, and what has actually changed, and what will you do should anything change? And then we spend a lot of time in our meetings on potential actions, discussing plan B, C, and D, and what will we do internally if things are changing. That's on our short-term planning forecast. On our more long-term planning, so that's what we call our capital allocation, which is basically a process we have once a year where we have this 5-year dot on the wall. So where do we want our business units and where do we want the group to be next 5 years, and what kind of capital does it take to go there? The same process around 5 years of full year forecast, calendar year forecast, of course, with the exact same input parameters. So still the same 35 accounts. We focus in that process a lot, of course, on the portfolio composition. So what do we want our portfolio to look like in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and what kind of capital does it need for each business unit to go there? And then we at group level take a decision when we have all the investment proposals for all our business units. So, and of course it doesn't add up to what we have in terms of cash flow in the company. And then we allocate to make sure that we have the right portfolio. And when I say we allocate, we actually sort of promises our business units that if things work out the way that you have planned, you will eventually get the cash from group. So it's not a bank transfer to the business units at all. And the same goes for this statement I have here. That if business units come up with an idea overnight, well discussed, well planned, they can always come to group. So the bank is always open outside of the normal capital allocation process. And then finally coming back to your question, so how do we deal with target setting? Because we do have a target setting process, and this process is basically because we have bonus at Maersk, so this is people's personal scorecards, people's personal bonus schemes, and they are decided on the following calendar year. So we're in the process right now of discussing and setting targets for our individual business units, and we definitely have a challenge here. the way the scorecard is set for business units, typical business units, is we have 2 financial indicators. So that would be an absolute return requirement as well as a relatively return requirement for the following calendar year. So that is 60% of the scorecard, and then the remaining 40% is something that should build the business over the future. So future-proofing the business. So that could be, so how much contract coverage do we want going into 2017 and so on, or how many investment proposals should come from the individual business units. The problem, and this is what you alluded to down here, is of course that, so when we compare the forecast we have just received for 2016 with the target setting, all people know, of course, that this is right now that their bonus is being set, so they are probably trying to be very conservative at the least in their forecast. And we haven't figured out how to deal with that, to be honest. So that's my next question to you. Please come up with the solution to me, or how you have done it in your own company. 5 minutes. Okay. I have the cube now, and I am definitely looking forward to some very good answers from you. And let's kick off.
We discussed that obviously target setting is by having the bonuses set or based on a profit, you always going to have that problem. You change what the bonus is paid upon. So taking the Handelsbanken model and the idea that the Maersk want to be a premium conglomerate, you could take the bonus to be relative to the total of all your competitors in your respective industries. So you add up BP and all your other competitors that may exist. Yes. You add them up, that equals X. As long as Maersk have a return greater than those subtotal of those, you've got the conglomerate premium, and therefore bonus is paid on top of it. Otherwise, you've got a conglomerate discounts.
Right. A very good suggestion. And let me just, I don't think we haven't linked it to our ambition of being a premium conglomerate, but we definitely have the relative, within the relative KPI. So that's the business units compared to peer group, as you mentioned. Are they best in class or best top quartile in class? That's one of the prerequisites at all for getting a bonus. But a good suggestion, thank you.
I think if you put bonuses to targets, I think you're actually destroying the value of setting targets. Simply because the purpose, in my opinion, to having a target is aiming, higher than you expect you can go.
Yes. Great.
And to have people think creatively about how they can achieve it. And if you relate it to the bonus, and people realize that okay, we didn't quite, aim or we didn't reach our target, then the next year they automatically will come up with a lower target. And then you're back into the same old, budgeting problems that you had in the past, where you're wasting time on, arguing, the top management saying, you should be aiming higher, and the one who is getting the bonus saying, no, we can't go higher. So there's a lot of energy that goes into that, instead of, the top management and the business units working together on creating solutions how they possibly can reach these targets. So I think the bonus in itself just automatically destroys it. So if you want to have really ambitious target setting, I think you definitely need to remove the bonuses, at least the way you're describing it now.
I would just, I'd be even more radical, potentially, and just question why you have a concept called a bonus. Because the concept of a bonus for something that you want somebody to do is basically incentivizing somebody to try and do what they are capable of doing. So why have a bonus? Why not just pay them fair market value for the role and the role that you want them to undertake? And if there is any surplus left within the business, distribute it through other means rather than a bonus.
Oh, definitely a fair comment, and I guess it's a theoretical discussion that Anders probably could talk about for hours, but I agree to a certain degree with you. We have just to make one comment to what you say, we have our bonus is more like a profit sharing scheme. So whenever it's above a certain level, that's a bonus. But that doesn't help, I know.
There's one thing you could think about is to link the performance measures to some more operational targets. Like, let's say I don't know anything about the shipping business, but let's say you're responsible for a certain fleet of ships, and you're measured based on, let's say, a mix of fuel efficiency and on-time delivery or something like that.
Yes. That would go into the non-financial parameters for some of the business units, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But we could use that to a higher degree than we do today.
You could do that.
That's fair.
Yeah. Because then it's something that you have power over.
Yeah, true.
But let's say the profitability of the business is something you will not have power over.
No.
Changing conditions, wars, and everything.
Final comment? Yes.
Yeah, interesting to listen to why a bonus. I guess I'd say why a target. So you've got a relative target there, and if you feel that you need that, why would you also want an absolute target? Because I think that would drive people towards a finite number, which can be quite dysfunctional.
True. I guess top management's argument to that is that you cannot live out of a relative target.
Although the Handelsbanken have proved that that's a very successful way of doing things.
Yes, true. No, true. Anders, any comments from your side?
Well, just one comment. I mean, in Beyond Budgeting, we talk very much about being on a Beyond Budgeting journey. And there are several reasons for doing that, but one of them is obviously that this stuff is difficult and does take time. And as I see it, you are also on a journey.
Absolutely.
And this is how far you've come so far.
Yes.
I think over time that the bonus will go. I think over time the targets will go, because I think that as we all get wiser, we find out that there are these dysfunctional behavior that is linked to this. It is against what most think. But I think time is on our side, that we are moving in that direction. So I wish you continued success on your journey.
Maybe. A final few slides from me on how we as a group interact with our business units. I'm not sure how much of this you can actually read, but all performance management is within the red box, and this is on an annual basis. So starting with the strategy planning that takes place in spring, this is where we set the long-term direction of the company on a yearly basis. And when I say long-term in this context, I mean for the following 5 years. This is follow up on a quarterly basis with the quarterly financial review meetings we have with all the business units, where we discuss what happened in the last quarter, but especially what is going to happen over the next 5 quarters. Then we have implemented a new set of meetings actually, which is what we call quarterly business reviews, where we take commercial, operational, organizational factors into account as well, on top of financial issues, to make sure that all aspects of the business is covered in these meetings. And then finally, as I mentioned, we are right now in the process of setting the targets for 2016. But this is our yearly wheel, as we call it, that ensures that we are more or less on top at all times in terms of our forecast and how they relate to the market assumptions that we have. So whenever market assumptions change, if oil price suddenly goes up by $20, we would immediately do a new forecasting round. This is how it works. This one is what we call our pressure cooker for performance. How we interact with our business units, make sure that all the business units have the right strategies, that they have the right action plans in place, that they have the right forecast, and so on and so on. make sure that they have the right executives at all times, and that they have a plan B and plan C as well, also in terms of executives. And this is where I should have started, that we at all times, as I mentioned previously, have the right portfolio mix. When we look at our business units from group side, we basically have these two success parameters in place. We want them, first of all, to be value creating over an economic cycle. And right now, and for the last 10, 15 years, we have defined value creating as being able to return 10% over for the invested capital. That's a very, very high number, and not all our business units are there at all, actually. That's point number one. And point number two, they need to be top quartile within their own industry at all times. Otherwise, they have no place at Maersk. This is how the picture looked entering or exiting 2012. Industry top quartile, not top quartile. So 7 out of our 8 business units are within the top quartile of their industry. And we have 4 business units that, on top of that, returned above their WACC in 2014. So definitely still some work to do, which is why performance management is a strategic focus area at Maersk and will continue to be. Final slide for me. Realized benefit of being through this exercise or this journey, as Anders mentioned, over the last 10 years. First of all, simplicity. We have a relative simple model today, as I mentioned to you. Within all our meetings, we have a high degree of focus on forward-looking issues, forward-looking assumptions. We don't spend a lot of time on explaining why last quarter didn't come in 2% or 2% above forecast or whatever. That is actually not that important. That doesn't mean that we don't implement learnings from our forecasting process. We definitely do. We have a very, very dynamic capital allocation. As I mentioned, if a business unit have a bright idea, they can put together a small working group and basically come outside of the normal management system. And this autonomy that we have been working on for the last many years as well has definitely increased, first of all, the autonomy at the business units, but also the ownership. And we have a strong belief. And when I went through this small book here, I saw one of the slides mentioning something that if you spend your life trying to be good at everything, you will never be great at anything. And we strongly believe in that. We strongly believe that empower the people who are experts and put them in charge of doing whatever they do best, and then the rest of us can focus on something else. So that's on the ownership. Well, that was the final slide for me. Any questions?
Thank you very much for that, by the way. That was very interesting. And considering the types of business that Maersk are in, one thing I didn't hear, I don't know where you stand on this, but the system that you've just described there has a very specific definition of value, which seems to me primarily associated with return on capital and shareholder value.
Yes.
Do you discuss how you create a performance system around a triple bottom line within Maersk?
A very good question, actually. We are, and maybe I should start at my very first slide, but we are a very old company, family funded, of course, but still majority owned by the family. And all we do is based on our culture. We hear repeatedly from our CEO and CFO that if a business deal is borderline to our cultural values, we should walk away from it. So that, but the problem is that's impossible to measure, basically, right? Yeah, I'm not sure that really answered your question. No, it didn't.
Not really.
No, not
whether that culture that emanates from that family ownership, whether that culture is one that predominantly focuses on financial return.
Yeah, not at all.
Rather than people and planet.
Not at all. People and planet extremely important to us. Extremely important. I think this is actually one of the very few companies I've ever heard about where the family expresses a certain interest that the company needs to be relevant in 100 and 200 years from now. So we need to make sure that our business is really future-proofed, and that we take care of, first of all, our people, because people are our assets, but also on Earth, as you mentioned.
Well, being from Denmark, in Denmark there's Maersk, the founder of the company. He has this expression called rettidig omhu.
Yeah, it's called constant care in English.
Yeah. So, I mean, in Maersk, they in times when things are looking good, they are trying to trim the organization, is how I see it, so that they are robust for when the crisis occur. So, what this value is that something that you operationalize in your work?
That's a difficult question. So basically, constant care to us means that we shouldn't repeat or shouldn't do any mistakes that we could have foreseen, basically, which is a very difficult one to adhere to and to plan to, right? But this is actually what we try to do when we have all these scenarios, sensitivities, try to make sure that whatever happens, we are prepared. And that's, of course, that's not always the case. But yeah, difficult question.
So the company is old. I used to work in the shipping market for a freight forwarding company a couple of years ago. So I guess there were also hard times in your business where the company was at danger. So what happened to the culture and to the values at that time?
Not a lot, actually. So what happened is that, and the period you refer to is 2009, 10-ish. Where
in the 90s.
Yeah, but 2009, 10 were a period where we had some seriously deficit in Maersk, and we entered or embarked on a major cost-cutting exercise, trying to have the best or the most competitive cost structure within that certain industry. Has that changed anything for the culture, for the company? I would definitely say no. Not at all, actually.
You're a quite big organization, and you are, if I remember correctly, in 130 countries. How is it making a change, like implementing something like this in such a diversely, company that's globally so big?
Extremely difficult, because what is appropriate for one culture, like the culture in Denmark or West Europe, for example, is completely different to whatever happens in other parts of the world. But it's well, our management, they travel a lot. They make the same cultural speeches whenever they come, try to have all 90,000 aboard of our cultural values. There's a lot of cultural days happening at all times at Maersk, but it's not easy, definitely not.